Welcome to Fatherhood Field Notes podcast, where I interview incredible fathers, gaining wisdom from their stories for both you and I to grow in our own craft of fatherhood. I'm your guide, Ned Shout, father to 5 kiddos, currently ages 12 to 19, and husband to my rad wife, Sarah, working on our 21st year of marriage. So yes, my friend, I'm in the thick of it. I'm in this with you, and I'm working daily to rebel against the low expectations for fathers and create a world where fathers know who they are as they show up for their families. You and I have the greatest opportunity to impact our world through the way we embrace our fatherhood role. This episode is brought to you by The Adventure of Fatherhood, helping men discover their powerful fatherhood role and build their fatherhood skills. The role of the father is to serve, guide, steward, protect, and of course, find joy and have fun in the messiness of it all. Today's guest is my friend, Brad Plett. Incredible man, humble, vulnerable, open about his life for the sake of others. He loves his wife, loves his kids, and he shows up daily to serve the world around him. You are going to enjoy this conversation. All right, my friends, welcome Fatherhood Field Notes. Brad, welcome to the podcast. How you feeling today?
Yeah, doing good. Thanks for having me, Ned.
Yeah, dude, stoked to learn more about your story and talk fatherhood with you. All right, my first question for you out the gate is, how old do you find yourself today?
45. Yeah.
How's 45 feel?
It's kind of like achy and sore. 45 is the thick of it, with kids and parenting. Add on achy and sore.
Dude, no doubt. Dude, I was so inspired this last weekend. I went hunting with a friend in Oregon to talk business and connect on some things. And we hunted his dad's property in Oregon. His dad's 87 years old, so double our age, essentially. And he's out there hunting, walking around with a rifle, driving the truck, driving the Razor. I was so inspired seeing this guy just out there. And, he's a little sore and achy, obviously, but still just cruising, dude. It was inspiring to see.
Yeah. Well, it is. I think the thing, 40s, I know that's not the topic of the session, but mid 40s, it's almost like there's this pressure time of life because at a stage where you're getting ready to launch some kids and you have some kids not ready to launch. And then you're thinking ahead, 60, 65 really isn't that far off,
Right.
It is, but it's going to come quick. So there's these pressures of am I ready for these next stages of life? Am I ready to launch my kids? Are they? So it's a weird stage of life. I'm just realizing there's a lot of pressure coming from a lot of different angles. Yeah.
Dude, I'm feeling it right now. Yeah, it's like I've got one kid in college. I've got one kid. I'm red-eyeing tonight to go look at a college with her. She's a senior. But then it's like my career, my business has like all this opportunity in it. I'm like, in 10 years, dude, I'll, be 50 something and I'll have way more time most likely to work on my business and my kids won't be here. So it's like really living in that tension, dude. And then also want to be a good husband on top of it and then make sure that, the lawn's mowed.
Yeah, exactly. You got a lot of grass to cut.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. All right. How many years you been married, Brad?
It'll be 25, January, February, March, April, May 2026 will be 25 years.
Dude, congratulations. That's a feat. That's a feat, man. I was recently at a marriage retreat and it was small, but several of the people there, I think 3 of the couples had been married like 48 to 52 years, like right in that range of 50 years where you're like, damn, like that's longer than I've been alive.
Yeah.
So you're on your way there. If the guy that's listening right now has been married 10 years, he's got little kids, he's like in the thick of that stage, what would you say to him that has been helpful to you and your bride to get you to like this stage of 25? Because 25 is like the big deal.
I mean, this probably sounds stereotypical. The first thing that comes to mind is be present. Because I know the first few years of having kids, my oldest 2, especially my oldest, I guess, toddlers, I wasn't very present because I was just in a really, really dark place in life. So I had, probably a few years span where I just, I was working lots, going through my own personal issues. I wasn't very present and I recognized that. So be really, really present. And I think on bigger picture too, I think one of the things that's helped my wife and I on the journey is we've known what we're called to, maybe not right at 10 years in, but over the years, it's become clear what the Lord's calling us to as a family, what we're supposed to be called to, how we're supposed to be serving, what we're supposed to be doing, where there's quite often where, you're maybe in the thick of it, or maybe you and your wife, we're just not connecting, not firing on all cylinders. And there's days where we, quite frankly, maybe don't even like each other, want to be in the same room with each other. And the thing that keeps you going isn't these feelings of like, oh, we feel the love, because you don't feel the love every day. But it's literally, if we would cease to exist as a couple and as a family, then this thing we're called into, our ministry, what we're doing, is going to cease to happen. And the impact isn't going to be there. So I think there's a big part of it where it's just, don't rely on the emotions, the feelings, be ever present and really know and understand what you're called to, what's God calling you to, but then being unified to your wife in that calling, whether it's like individual callings or as a couple. Just be unified, because that's really something that keeps us on the course, is just knowing, God, you've called us to this, and we know the enemy's going to come at us. So it helps remind us that we're on the right path.
Yeah. Okay. So some words came up that I want to ask you about. So one, this like idea, and it's kind of just like a saying, right? Like, oh man, I'm not feeling the love right now. I think like, man, for men to especially come back and ask yourself, like, what am I defining love as? If I'm going to love this family, if I use 1 Corinthians 13, well, like I probably do feel the love a lot. I feel like I've got to lean into patience and grace and kindness and all these things when I don't want to. I think for us dudes to like not redefine, but lean into like, what does love mean to me? Another word you said, which I like, right? Especially as Christians, we sometimes like, oh, what am I supposed to do? Right. So you talked a little bit about supposed to do. What do you mean by that? Like you said calling, you said supposed to do, but then I love this other word you use, co-laborer, right? So it's almost like an opportunity. So sometimes I personally, and I'll wrap with this and you respond, sometimes I can get stuck on this idea of like, oh, shoot, am I supposed to be an insurance salesman? Right. And I think a lot of men find themselves in that, right? Like, I do this job that America created at some point, and is this purposeful or meaningful? So, with that in mind, I mean, the thing is men need to pave roads and cut down trees and make lumber and build home, like all of these things. Like the world wouldn't go around with like the everyday man showing up. So when you talk about supposed to and co-laborer and the things I said, what's your response to like men who are listening?
Yeah, I think for me, when I think of the supposed to, and I can't even remember exactly what I said, in the exact context, but I think like for my wife and I, we've really grown to believe that you can have like a deep, intimate relationship with the Lord. And, Psalm 139, we believe God's created us as unique individuals, right? He knows our inmost being. He knit us together in mother's womb, the whole thing. And so for us, there's this literal belief that we feel like God has placed unique things within us. And the world can be a better place if we understand what that is and step into it. So almost, it's not so much going for the function first, but it's more about like, who am I as a son or daughter of God? But then when you have that understanding, it's like now this becomes the function of that. You know what I mean? And so for me, the supposed to is like, a number of years ago, we felt called to sell everything and get into missions full time with Youth with a Mission, YWAM, in the form of like family ministries, family discipleship training schools. And so we believed it was something that, using like our story, but also the passions we had inside us, it was something we feel like God was stirring our hearts to. And then as you step into that, it's like, okay, God, I think you're calling us to this. I think you're in this. So we're going to like partner and we're going to co-labor together heading in this direction. And then there's been many times on that journey. So the supposed to is the word to us, that calling at this point, like it hasn't changed. So it's like, this is like this point, like this is what we're supposed to be doing. Right. Because his word, his calling, his purpose for us at this point hasn't changed, as its primary function. But it comes from that place of identity and believing, God, this is who you've created to me. This is the passions you put into us. And this is how we want to use our story to help other people.
Yeah. I mean, I think right there, that word of, it's not so much the function. So it's like, when we say God's calling you, or you've been called, like everybody is his child, and it's a calling to your identity, which is what you said. And then, okay, it's not so much now, it's like the function, well, like, shoot, I needed Ned to do X, but it's like I'm his kid and I can take my identity and go love and serve the world, kind of regardless of the function. Now, sometimes function does show up, right? And maybe a lot of us are pursuing some career because we're just trying to figure out our identity on our own, right? So once you kind of come clear on who you are, then maybe it's a very obvious, like, oh, this function I've been pursuing was for whatever reason, and it's not really where I find my like greatest zone of genius. And then lastly, and then you can kind of respond to this, is another thing that you said that I just thought, dude, so important right now, especially as it relates to family, is you said, if I don't step into this supposed to, or this identity, or this calling, this opportunity, then something ceases to exist, right? You use this, it ceases to exist. And I mean, I think just at like a super ground level, if we're talking fathers, I think one of our greatest opportunities in life is just to love and serve a family, and it's like, if I made that my primary focus, like I'm going to love and serve my family, kind of regardless of what I do out in the bread making, money making field, is like, dude, I hope that if we came back in 1,000 years, we still see healthy families. Healthy meaning, a mom and a dad together with their kids fighting for this. Because I feel like it's such a good image of the kingdom. So with that being said, any other thoughts on this kind of like calling, supposed to, feeling of love, any of the things we talked about?
Well, I think, like, in the context of family, I think, one of the greatest gifts that I can give my wife, and my 4 kids is being a dad, father, and a man of God who's in pursuit of understanding, who am I as a man of God? Who have you created me to be? Who am I as your son? Not just like years ago before we made the transition to, kind of what you say, your typical work life into missions. When we made that transition and I stepped out of like my HR, my management position, and then full time into missions, it was culture shock. It was a massive, like, almost identity crisis, because you're going into this place where you kind of meet somebody, you have a title, and then all of a sudden you're into this brand new place, right? Starting a new life. Nobody knows you. Nobody knows what you've done. Nobody knows that you've been like a manager. Nobody knows that you've had a position of like authority. And all of a sudden you're like, nobody knows who I am. Do you know what I mean? Like, don't you know who I am, what I've done? And you're stuck in this place of like, I've lost my identity in the function of what I did and who I was. And so the greatest gift I can give my family, kids, is really developing a solid understanding of God. Like, you've created me. What does it mean to be your son? What does sonship mean? Because in that, I believe that's what's going to lead me to this place of function. And the reality is, most people don't stay in a job or a career because of the money. Most people will stay and remain in their function, their career, because of fulfillment. And so I believe that me and understanding who I am as a son of God is actually going to lead me into a function that's going to be more fulfilling than if it's just about just the pursuit of like what's maybe the next best thing, you know and then, I mean, in theory, I should be happier, I should, be more fulfilled, which should make me a better father and a husband. We know it doesn't always work the way, because stuff comes up, right? There's always tension, no matter whether you're, on the path of what you feel called to, or whether you're not. But yeah, I think that's the greatest gift I can give them.
So two things. One is, it's like, if a dad's listening to this and he's like, dang, dude, I'm still kind of like figuring out who I am. You mentioned, okay, so the reason I say that is I think some guys are still trying to figure out who they are. And I feel like sometimes I'm wrestling with that. And so it's like, how do I confidently show up for my family when I'm trying to also work on myself? And so maybe you could speak to, you kind of said there was a season where you weren't very present because it was kind of like, this is a dark place. And so if a guy right now is really wrestling with who he is, but he wants to love his wife, he wants to love his kids, but he's like, gosh, I don't feel qualified, but here I am. What would you feedback would you give him to like transition to like, hey, dude, here's how you get out of the dark season. You don't have to have it all figured out, but whatever. What do you think?
For me, the journey really of getting out of that, because that season for me was, when I look back on it now, and imagine not everybody listening to this podcast is necessarily Christians, as believers, you probably get a full array of people where they're at. But for me, it was this journey in hindsight, realizing a season of what I would consider like spiritual attack. There was just a lot of things like guilt, shame, fear, and anxiety that kind of all culminated at the same time. And a lot of it came from, my past, and all of a sudden it struck. And it was at a time back when we had our careers, and we had two really, really young kids. And my wife and I were both stepping into ministry aside from our careers. And, we had our careers, but then us stepping into these side ministries was what we were truly passionate about. And it was at that time, there was something in it. We just knew the devil didn't like it. He didn't want that to happen. So he was going to take everything he can and really throw it at me. And so I became really like a dark and angry and bitter person. And you can ask my wife. I mean, we would call Brad, would get into this toxic state, and I just wasn't a loving man, a loving husband. I didn't love my wife the way Christ loved the church. And so in that, life just felt, it was just hard. It was dark. And I remember there was days for me where I felt like the Lord was saying, Brad, just get through to the next day. Brad, just get through to the next day. And this is going back like 2011. This is a few years ago already, but it was just like, get through one more day, get through one more day. And the thing that really got me through, and the beauty of that journey, was I started to ask myself this really, really simple question. And it was something I was embarrassed to admit that I was asking this question, because I grew up in a Christian home. I had loving parents, and I was always raised, Jesus died on the cross, to save us for our sins. That's what I was taught. And that's true. In this journey, in my early kind of mid 20s, late 20s, whatever it was, I found myself asking this question: why did Jesus die on the cross? And I'm like, why am I asking myself this question in this dark season of life? I'm starting to ask myself the question: why did Jesus die on the cross? And the beauty in that was, it really led me to the Word of God. It led me to the Bible, and there's like lots of testimonies of people get radically saved, or they're like encountered, these intense encounters, and it transforms their lives. For me, it was this long journey of really reading, Romans chapter 5, 6, 7, 8, repeatedly, because we're reading, there is therefore now no condemnation for those who are in Christ Jesus, who walk not in the flesh but in the spirit. I'm just like, yeah, but I feel condemned. So, I mean, I must be doing something wrong, and reading that like many, many times. But then all of a sudden, as I'm on this journey, there's lots to it. There was amazing people in my life. We had amazing mentors getting involved, in our marriage, our communication. That was all really hard. So we had this incredible mentor that was like a filter for me. It was like, before I would communicate with my wife, on, intense issues, I would talk to him first, and he would help be my filter. And my wife was down with that. But I really started to grow in this understanding, like, Jesus, why did you die for me? And so one of my life passages, 2 Corinthians 5:16-21, says, like, behold, those who are in Christ are a new creation, and the old is gone and the new is here, and we've been reconciled to God. He became sin who had no sin, so in him we might become the righteousness of God. And so it led me to this place of like, wow, like, God, if you're not sitting up in heaven, or Jesus, you're like here with me, I got the Spirit of God in me. If you're not sitting there like condemning me and holding all this stuff against me, who am I to hold it against myself? The very fact that I'm sitting here holding all this against myself is actually sin in its truest form, because I'm functioning as somebody that God isn't intending me to function as. And so for me, there became this realization, this revelation, even taking a look at like Paul talking to Timothy and saying, Timothy, God has not given you a spirit of fear, but he's given you power, love, and sound mind. For me in that season, my mind was anything but sound. But I'm like, if Paul is telling Timothy that God didn't create you to have fear, but he's given you power, love, and a sound mind, I'm like, that's true for me. So there started to become this gradual shift of not just like a radical moment, but this realization that, like, God, you aren't holding anything against me. And right now, my mind, everything feels like a mess, but that's not how you built me. That's not the truth of who I am. And as I started to realize it and accept it, I realized that, like, yeah, God, sent his son to die on the cross to save me from hell, right? So I could spend eternity in heaven. But it meant far more than that, in the sense of, like, now here on earth, he became sin who had no sin, so we might become the righteousness of God. I may have right standing with God because of Jesus' death on the cross and my acceptance of him. I'm like, because of what Jesus did for me, I'm actually totally and completely free in the eyes of God. When I'm sitting there feeling like crap because of maybe something I did 10 years ago, do you know what I mean? Or something I did yesterday, God is just sitting there and all he sees is Jesus. He's like, Jesus, thanks for taking it for Brad. Thanks for stepping in and taking it for him. And when I started to get revelation of that, that was the gate opening towards me being able to start walking in a greater level of freedom. And for me, that dark season and finding freedom in it, really is what opened the door to our passions becoming even more ignited. I'm just like, I don't want to work a day job anymore. I just want to, like, I want to get into ministry. I want to do something. And it was at that time that God led our family to do a DTS with YWAM in California. So that was back in 2013.
Beautiful. I love it. So if a dude's listening right now and he's like, oh my gosh, bro, you're speaking to me. Like I feel the anxiety, the shame, the guilt, the fear all at the same time. And I feel like I'm just a robot getting through each day, surviving each day. I love that it's not like, Ned, it was a Tuesday and like this light caught me on the road and like I was blind for 3 days and then the scales fell off my eyes, right?
Do you know, I wish I could have a story like that, because I mean, it would have saved me years of just like tragic. Sometimes,
Yeah, I hear you, but I think the reality is those are great stories and we hear more of those.
yeah,
And I don't want to say it's more realistic, but I don't necessarily believe in silver bullets. I think a lot of people these days are chasing silver bullets. And I'm not saying there aren't tools and things that you could do, but if you and I build a house and it took us one day and it was easy, we're like, cool. But if you and I worked for a year laboring, sweat, blood, tears, mistakes, we build this house, you and I look at it together, we're like, damn, dude, look at this. There'd be so much pride in the work.
yeah,
Right. And as men, we feel that way about a lot of things, but can we shift that towards ourselves? Can we shift that towards our marriages and look at it the same way where it's like, yo, if I hit my thumb with the hammer today, it's all good. I'm back tomorrow, versus I think sometimes we're like, well, I tried working on myself. I tried working on my marriage. It's like, did you really though, like a man? So if a dude's listening, well, first off, what I'm hearing is it's going to take time, a couple years. You know what I mean? Whatever, lifetime. And I do also like that you said that it drove you to the word, right? It drove you, and clearly, right? You just spit it off the couple different things, and clearly you didn't read it twice and just have a good memory. Like you straight ate that every day for a season, so where you can just say it out loud. So any other tips you'd give a dude if he's like, I need to, want to, desire to fight to transition out of this desperate feeling and I want to step into my identity? What are a couple steps? Read the Bible. What else?
yeah. I think it's getting the word. I think, like, we had some really sound people, like, a part of our lives. Like,
You mentioned that. Yeah, like some good mentors that are kind of walking with you.
yeah, we had good community, and man, it's like over 20 years ago, but it's, my wife and I will teach and we'll use our story for teaching others, and the rawness and the reality of it never goes away after that many years. And sometimes it's like, man, like, this sucks. Like, I wish there wasn't any emotion to it. But the reality is, I mean, if God's calling you to use your story to share other people, you better be connected to, like, what it felt like and what it was like, because there's power in our stories and our testimony. So we had good people to come around us. And I think the thing is, like, just a ton of humility, and for us as men, we don't really want to admit that we need help, or that we're helpless. I mean, that's why, like, AA, one of the first things you got to say is, I'm powerless to my addiction. Why? Because it's a massive step of humility. Pride comes before the fall. You know what I mean? And how many of us, in their times of pride, make decisions like, oh yeah, down I go again. So there was like just massive amount of, I think it was like humility and admitting like I'm lost. But I think in some of our darkest times, where in all reality my wife had every right biblically to leave me and probably wanted to, we had some incredible people that they believed in us for who we were going to become. They were like, you guys are far better together than you are apart, and they believed in us and who we were as a couple at a time when we didn't see any hope. We didn't see any way out. And so I think that's a part of when I go back to that supposed to. It's like when you have people in your life, they're like, you don't see it, but we believe in you guys more than you believe in yourselves, and then you come out the other side of that and you're like, wow, like what God did in our lives, we want to help other people. Yeah, if that helps anybody.
Yeah, no, no. So I have a question. Oh, well, I mean, first off, just thank you. You're just such a rad dude. I mean, this matters. Like, clearly, it matters to you, right? Like, so I think everybody on here is like, dude, if this guy's talking to families, like, I want to hear what he has to say. So just thank you for what you're doing with your story. A question for you is, and I know this is like a fatherhood podcast, but I think one of the most important gifts we can give our kids is this fighting for family.
Yeah.
So I would just love to ask you this last question, and then we'll move into some more fatherhood specific things. But for the dude who's at that 10, 15-year mark, or he's in that position of like, man, I'm thinking about divorce, because we do see some marriages that are like, they just stick it out. It's like, there's no depth to it.
Mhm.
And you mentioned there were a season where there was no hope. You didn't see it, blah, blah, blah. Like it was rough, right? Like you kind of like, dang, heavy. Tell me about your connection to your wife today because you've gone through the fire, right? Versus like, just like kind of sticking it out versus like dug deep into the shit and did the work. What is your relationship like today? Because I want to give guys hope that it's like, if you dig in and like you said a minute ago, love your wife the way that Christ loved the church, which is like, yo, die.
Yeah.
Tell me about your guys' relationship now, like the depth.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing coming out of that was because my wife, right before I stood in that season, she went through this journey, what she called like becoming completely his, where she was on this journey, embarked on this journey of like becoming like, what does it really mean to be a daughter of God? So she had just gone through this a kind of season of like identifying her identity of what it means to be a daughter of God. Then as I'm turning the corner into this season of falling apart and I'm a mess, and I'm just a jerk of a husband most of the time, ruining family vacations, all this stuff because I'm like a head case. She was on her knees praying. I'd leave for work just angry. She'd crank on the worship music and she was just praying for me, and I didn't know that. But the beauty of what it brought us to was it brought us to this place of really like stripping away, I think, insecurity in our relationship. I mean, insecurities can always come up. So it's not like we're never insecure. But I mean, stripping away because there's this understanding that, she's solid in who she is as a daughter of God. I know who I am as a son of God. And the gift that we give our spouses when we get to that point is we're now not solely dependent on the other person. Like my sole focus isn't to look at my wife and say it's Chantel's job to meet all my needs. You know what I mean? Before, yeah, because I married her because I was codependent. You know what I mean? I mean, she's gonna be everything I'm not, right?
Right.
But then she's gonna be everything I'm not. But then, well, what happens if all of a sudden she's not there? Do you know what I mean? Like she's gone right now, she's gone off island, but gone for a week. She's gone for another week. Do you know she's not here? Does that give me the right to look at porn and masturbate? Do you know what I mean? It doesn't. But like my journey of sonship, and she knows who I am as a son of God. She has confidence in being a way that Brad knows who he is as a son of God. And she knows, yeah, like he's a man, you'll be tempted, all this stuff. But she has more faith in the fact that I have a relationship with God than she does in me as an individual, because she knows me on my own and my mess. So that was like the greatest gift like we could give each other, was really just saying, I love you, honey, but like my relationship with the Lord is more important. And, likewise. And this deep, intimate relationship that we have with the Lord actually like releases each other. It frees us up because now it's not like you're my everything, you fill on me. It's actually, like Jesus, you fill me up first. And from an overflow of that is where we get to love each other.
Dude, bro, so good. Yes, it's so interesting because it's like, yes, we're attracted to this woman. We're coming off of being a kid and having a mother, right? It's like, how many of us kind of look to our spouse to fulfill the need? But then it makes so much more sense in the way that you're communicating this of like, if we both know who we are, then when we come together, it's like so pure because it's not out of a selfish desire of what I need to get from you, but I know who I am. So like when I walk in the room, what can I give to you? So massive. Then, I mean, I'm almost brought to tears with you talking about your wife praying for you. It's like, my thought is like, dudes, we have let the women carry the torch for too damn long.
Yeah.
Like if you think about if we were to do a poll, who's on their knees praying for people? It's moms, it's wives, right? It's like they've been carrying the torch for a long time where we like think we're so freaking awesome as men. But if you think about that, my point is there's an opportunity for us men as we know who we are to start carrying some of that load, praying for our spouse, praying for our parents, praying for our children, praying for our children's future spouses, future families. Like, and this is kind of a thing I'm drawn to right now because like, dude, I'd rather we just wake up and get to work. Like I feel like I'm working if I'm not sitting praying for an hour. Like, let me just do work.
Yeah.
But I think that there's such a power to carve out that time and go before the Lord and just be like, yo, these things matter. I want to talk to you about them before I get to, like, that's work. That is an important work for us to have.
I think just one point, and I always hate reading self-help books, and it's all just about like everything the dude does, right? So like, don't get me wrong. Like I look at myself and I'm like, I'm one of the most self-centered people out there. Do you know what I mean? It's because like I want my needs met. And so it's not like it's just like, oh, Brad and Chanel, they got like this intimate relationship with the Lord. And it's just like, I'm good. You know what I mean? But it doesn't. There's still a tension. Our flesh still pulls. But the reality is we always have, we know what we go back to. We know what we fall on. We know the truth about who we are at the end of the day.
Yeah. And I think, sometimes I feel like, okay, I'm a Christian. I follow God. I know the scripture. I've already read the New Testament. I've already read the Old Testament. It's like, I just let me go be now. But it's kind of like if I'm like, yeah, I had lunch yesterday, so I never need to eat lunch again. It's like realizing that this is a part of fueling your life. It's like working out.
Yeah.
If I want to have a strong body, I'm going to go put 7 hours a week into the gym. Am I not willing to do that same thing on my mental, spiritual game or my marriage for that matter? It's like, yo, dude, invest in this. Okay, you said it. You have 4 kids. What's the youngest to the oldest? What's that range?
So we got 4, 10, 14, and 17. So it's like a pretty good range.
Pretty good. You got every stage right now other than diapers. Okay.
So that's at 45. It's like, we're in the thick of it.
Yeah, no doubt about that. And then you guys, you kind of mentioned it. You live here in Kona, live in Hawaii, part of YWAM. So if you were to say in a sentence or two, what it is that you do to provide for your family, like you've alluded to some family ministry stuff, but in a couple sentences, couple minutes or less, what is it specifically that you do kind of on a daily basis?
Yeah. So we moved here full time almost 10 years ago, call it that. And so, like I mentioned earlier, we kind of sold almost everything back in Canada, originally from there. We got like 9 Rubbermaid totes at my wife's parents' place. It's kind of all we got there. But I mean, so we jumped into this lifestyle of what we call faith and finance, where we raise support. We got churches, and for lack of a better term, there's a lot of people out there that love the idea of missions and serving other people, but they either don't want to or don't believe they can do it themselves. So they're like, hey, we want to support somebody that does. So most of our income comes from people that believe in what we do. And so we moved here to work with, and then and now lead what's called the Family DTS, Family Discipleship Training School, Youth with a Mission. I mean, obviously, all about the youth, but there was just this belief that a family had in 2013 that families can do missions with YWAM, and we can build a discipleship training school that works for the family unit. So
yeah, so I'd love to plug this for a minute. I have not done it, but if my kids were young and I would have done this. But essentially, a family can come do a training and then go on a 3-month mission together. Is that correct?
yeah, so what happened is they'll come here, and there's 11 weeks what we call a lecture phase, and then during that lecture phase, there's different topics, speakers that we're bringing in, and really the whole focus. You sit with your spouse, and a lot of the topics are really there to drive you into a greater, deeper, more intimate relationship with the Lord. And then there's specific topics of, marriage that we'll bring in there. But a lot of what you're doing is together with your spouse. So for a lot of families, they're stepping into this season because they're just driving these independent lives. Dad's gone all the time, or mom, or you own a business or whatnot. And now you get like this breath of fresh air where it's like, man, we get to like break down the walls, just come be together as a family and give the Lord time to have way in our lives. And then while the parents are in their 11 weeks, the kids go to what's called foundation school. So it's essentially like a DTS for the kids, where they're getting like similar topics, but it's geared for age like 4 to 17. So while the parents are getting fed, the kids are getting fed as well. And then after 11 weeks, then we have what's called like an 8-week outreach or field assignment that our staff or leaders will bring the families on all over the world.
And where some place, okay, so all over the world. So like when you're there, you could say, you know what, we really feel like we want to go serve pick a place and go serve there for 2 months?
Yeah, we'll have set locations. And I mean, it's a set school, so there's curriculums and things we do. But for example, like our family, we've been to, Guatemala, Philippines multiple times, Uganda, Burundi, Indonesia, kind of multiple different countries. Sometimes we even send families on mainland USA for outreaches. We've done local outreaches here.
Dude, epic. Okay, so like I know a friend who he has a business, an IT business, and he like brought somebody in to run his business for 3 months, and he took his family and they did the DTS, and then they were gone for 3 months. So I just want to encourage people, like, dude, especially if your kids are under 12, you're not in the high school season, you're not in the sports season quite yet, what a great thing to look back and be like, we took 3-month pause, went and got closer as a family and went and served. So if people wanted to learn more about that, just like ywam.org.
Yeah, I think we'll post the link here along with the podcast, but you can just go to the uofnkona.edu and search Family DTS or Family DTS uofnkona.edu. It'll come up. Yeah.
Love it. Yeah, what a cool opportunity. All right. In your opinion, Brad, what's the role of the father?
Man, that's a big question. Really, for me, and it comes with my passion. You'll hear that identity theme with me all the time. But for me, it's really to help my kids understand that Jesus loves them, that they have been uniquely created by the Father. And I want them to desire to pursue that. God knows us fully. And I want my kids to pursue kind of knowing themselves the way God knows them, right? But then also knowing God deeply. So that's my thing. Like my greatest thing, when my kids leave home, they would say, Dad, the greatest lesson you showed me and what I'm taking away is the fact that I believe that Jesus loves me intimately. I believe that he speaks to me, and I want to be attentive to his voice, and I want to co-labor with him. That's my greatest desire as a dad, is to lead my kids into this place and model it for them. That they can have a deep, intimate relationship with the Lord, and that if they pursue intimacy with him, they'll figure out what the function of their life is going to look like together. And it's going to be wildly hard, but wildly fulfilling, but that they get to do it with the Lord. I don't want them to live life like me, where it's like years down the road. It's like I used to make massive decisions like buying and selling houses, all this stuff. I wouldn't even pray about it. I'm a Christian, but I'm not even praying about those decisions. That's my desire for them as a father.
Dude, super well said. I love it because I've been thinking about this, especially, so I've got my one son, our sons are friends. And it's like, we both know like they're going to be leaving the house sometime in the next couple of years. So they're like, this, you and I have been talking about this. There's this good pressure for us to show up well for them and send them off. But there's this deepening reality that like, and I talked to Brody about this the other day, is like, I'm not going to be your parent for much longer in the sense of parenting you on the daily, right? And so, I'm always your father, but I'm not going to be parenting you like, dude, you clean your room, you brush your teeth, you do your chores, blah, blah, blah. Like that season is coming, too fast for me and not fast enough for him, right? But there's this realization that at a certain point, the obedience piece, I think that this big part of you and I as fathers, this idea that my kid learns to be obedient to me has very little to do with like me and I'm a man of this house and you respect me. And it has everything to do that is he able to hear a voice and be obedient to that, right? And that's the passing of the torch. I'm like, I got to pass this kid over to God in a way, like he's already God's, but that's the training. The training is, can I prepare him to understand what it means to not just be selfish every second and to hear and listen and then step into it? And it's like, dude, that's a lot of responsibility for you and I.
Well, I was say, like, I think what part of this, building off that a little bit, is the co-founder of, YWAM, Youth with Missionary, says compliant kids won't change the world. And I remember that I think about that a lot because I would say our kids generally, you know what I mean? Maybe they'll come to the point of complying, but usually having a good argument as to why they shouldn't comply right away. Do you know what I mean? But I think there's like, as a father, I don't want to create an environment of like, I'm the man, you listen to me. It's not an environment of like submission. Do you know what? Even like husbands and wife, we submit to each other out of our reverence for Christ. The Bible tells us not to exasperate our children. And so it's not like it's an environment, do whatever you want. It's totally fine. But like my job isn't to you submit to me. You know what I mean? But I think that's the stage you and I are at right now with, I got the four-year-old, right? She's amazing. But then the 17-year-old, it's this realization like, son, like we've taught you a lot. Like I've told you the mistakes I've made and I'm like, please don't repeat them. I've told you the hurt and the pain. Like I can foresee the hurt and the pain for you if you choose to go down this path. Right. So I think that's the hardest part now is like, Ned, we've thrown everything in the kitchen sink at them and definitely there's stuff we missed, but like now they got to make their choice. We can't pick them up like the 4-year-old and just move them and say, no, you're showering now.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's the point of us dads is to teach our kids to not look to us as the end all be all, but to point them to God.
Yeah.
Right. To point them, right? Because, yeah. Dude, okay, something I want to point out that I notice about you that I would love for other men to also see is anytime I asked you a question, instead of you giving me an answer like, I know this, you always started off with for me. So you'd say, for me, and you'd give your answer. And I think it's so powerful because it's not the, well, Ned, my truth about this matter is, which I think is a bit horseshit answer for people. Yeah. And it's also not to just have the answer like so confident that like this is the only way. But when you lead off with, for me, you are sharing your story and then allowing me to receive it and then do what I want to do with, which is like what you're talking about, modeling to your kids. You're doing the same thing with us. And I would just love for dads to start to lead that way because I think we can be the answer guys or the know-it-all guys, but to go like, hey, for me, if my kid asks me a question, it's like, hey, for me, but without it feeling like if you don't also make this decision, you're an idiot, right? Because that's not what you were saying. So anyways, I just felt that's obviously something that you've cultivated and curated over the years. And I would just love for dads to tap into that as well. Do you notice that or any thoughts on that if you were coaching someone on that?
Well, I think it's the reason, the benefit, that like my wife and I have is like we work with people. Like that's what we do. We lead people, work with people. So then you just realize that, and I think that's the thing with our kids. Like we as dads can get so prideful and like, I'm the man. Like you should listen to me. I'm the dad. How dare you dishonor me? But like there's nothing, I shouldn't say nothing, because there's times where we have to be like assertive and I'm the father, you listen. Definitely times like that where it's not even about a learning lesson at this point. It's like you just do what I say. But really not a lot like he's eternally gained by just live a lifestyle of like, yes, sir, I'll just do what you say. And we've realized over the years, like people are gonna like grow a lot more, learn a lot more if like we can give them the tools or our experiences, but let them decipher that for themselves. Like my son came to me the other night, and he's like, Dad, I'm thinking I'd like to save up and buy this. And I'm like, in my mind, I'm thinking like, no, like that's no. But I'm like, well, hey, like let's just think about this. Let's take a look at your financial priorities. So I just started listening. I think like you have these things lining up, so then where would this kind of fall in the priority list? And there definitely has been times like, no, that's stupid. Like, don't spend your money on that. But I mean, there was a moment there where I got it right because I'm just laying out like, hey, let's think about your priorities, and maybe what you should consider first. And then it gives him more food for thought as opposed to me just saying, no, I'm your dad. I'm smarter than you. So like, don't do it. I don't know
Yeah.
if that helped.
No, 100%. I think if we could lean into moments like that more than just like, even if we do know the answer, is it better for us to tell them the answer or is it better for us to try to help them figure it out themselves? Now, if sometimes it has backfired on me where I'm like, I'm going to paint this picture and he's definitely going to choose the thing that I'm thinking is right.
Yeah.
And I've messed up before. If it has to be your way, then just say it. But if you're okay with him making a quote unquote mistake in your eyes, then let him do that. Let him still choose to purchase the thing and then realize, dang, I shouldn't have done that. Like there's a lesson in it there as well. Brad, dude, oh my gosh, our conversation has been so rich. I still have like 1,000 questions I want to ask you, but I know our time's coming to an end just with life. I got to go do some homeschool things. You got to go pick up a kid, real life stuff. So, okay, you've already kind of shared what you're rebelling against and what you hope to create in my mind. Like you're showing this life, of not necessarily going with the flow. So, with that in mind, two last things is what's the legacy? So, if you were to look into your kids' homes when they're 45 years old, so say you had this opportunity, you got to look in their homes when they're your age today. What is it that you'd see being played out in the house that would just put a big old smile on your face and you'd be like, okay, I showed up well as a father?
Yeah. Can I touch on the rebel and create thing a little bit?
Yeah, dude, please.
I think because I was thinking before we hopped on here, I actually thought about that quite a bit. And I think the thing, so growing up in the 80s, being born in 80, I remember back then, the white collar jobs was where it was at. Do you know what I mean? Like university, college, like into the 90s, like that's where it was at. And I have nothing against that. But that was like the drive. That was the lane. And so me going through high school, I was like, I'm destined to be on the end of a shovel for the rest of my life. Because I was in a place in high school, where I'm like, I don't really know what I want to be. I'm having a hard enough time staying focused and getting like half decent grades here. I like the social environment, but school really, I'm not crushing it. Do you know what I mean? And I didn't have any clue. And any of these kids are going off to college, doing all this stuff. And then when I would apply myself, I would get really good grades. But I think we as parents going through high school, like in the 90s, was like college degrees, all that stuff was like highly touted as the thing to do. But then you move a few years down the road, being on the end of a shovel actually financially isn't that bad. Do you know what I mean? The blue collar jobs and the trades, in Hawaii here, if you own a plumbing company or you're an electrician, it's not like a ticket to print money, but like if you're good and you show up on time, you're going to be wildly successful. And so for me, the big thing, I think, as we've come and look at parenting our kids, and this has been really hard because this paradigm still being in the 90s ingrained of like education, what that looks like. Society trains us to the Bible says, raise up a child in the way they shall go. And when they're old and older, they shouldn't depart from it. It's a good word of wisdom, but it's not a promise. Do you know what I mean? And so often we look at that as like, well, what's society saying? Is it like you go to high school, you graduate, some countries even say you can't homeschool. It has to be through a traditional school system. But like this day and age, we got so many options. You know what I mean? But there's still this mindset of like, I need to have my kid institutionalized in a school because they have to graduate, get their traditional diploma. Do you know what I mean? Because it's the right thing to do as a parent. But the area rebel and create comes in is realizing that our kids aren't all built for the system. And that's something we've been faced with is like, even like our oldest son years ago, grade 5, we had him signed up to do soccer. The kid doesn't want to play soccer. He has no desire to play soccer. He has no desire for team sports. We're driving along, towards Walmart up here. My wife and I were like, we're not having him do soccer. We're like, let's focus on God. Who have you created him to be, and put him in something like that lends towards his design. And so the rebel and create for us really has become more about, okay, God, who have you uniquely created our kid to do? And let's try to get them in that lane, even if it means we need to make adjustments with their school, with what their education looks like, and then let's shape that based on, like, what are the things we see in them, and how do we help direct them towards that, as opposed to just saying, no, you have to be in the institution. You have to figure out what you're going to do. You have to go get a degree for it. I'd rather them see, like, I'm actually passionate about this. College has nothing to do with it. I'm going to write my GED, and then I'm going for it. Do you know what I mean? So that would be, kind of rebelling against the societal norms of, like, the way that we're supposed to do things. We've talked about that a little bit. So
Yeah, we've talked about this.
that would be kind of real time journey that we are on. So I think from a legacy standpoint, that's what I want. That really is it. Like, is our kids will never be able to look back and think my mom and dad never took any risks. Do you know what I mean? Because they sold stuff, they took us all around the world, and done things. The greatest thing would be is like, I wish my parents were maybe a little more normal. Do you know what I mean? Had normal jobs, all that stuff. There's probably a greater risk than feeling that way.
But maybe some of them will choose that, right? We all make decisions based on our story, but I'm sure they're going to find themselves. And that's the thing is like understanding who God made you to be and then going out and operating as that person. That's what the world needs, right? The world needs each and every one of us. And it's a risk. It's a risk to do that. It's vulnerable versus falling in line and doing what everybody else is doing.
Yeah.
Brad, seriously, bro, incredible. Your passion, your heart. I absolutely love spending time with you. Thank you for the man you are, the husband you are to your bride, the way you parent, love your kids, and the way you serve your community. Seriously, dude, you're doing incredible work. And I love too that it's like the vulnerable part of you. It's this wrestle, right? You're not showing up as the guy who has it all figured out. Like, here's my 12-step plan to do it, which is fine. But
I wish sometimes.
yeah. Yeah. Well, dude, I just want to say massive blessing, life, love in your family. Thank you for being here. And I look forward to our paths continuing to cross over the years, dude.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Ned. This is incredible. Honored to be a part of it.
All right, man. Until next time. I so loved my time with Brad. I just felt like it was kind of unfortunate that we both just, life, just like you probably got to go do something right now. I just so enjoyed the conversation, so rich. I really enjoyed this idea of teaching your kids to know who they are, hearing the voice of God, and hearing his vulnerability around just his passion. And here's the thing that was really clear to me. Like sometimes you hear Christians or religious people talk and it sounds religious, right? It sounds like to-dos. It sounds like work. But I would say, and I know you've probably sensed this as well, is just the depth of freedom. Not perfection, not figured it out, but the depth of freedom that Brad felt shared, especially in regards to the way that he spoke about his faith, was just like a breath of fresh air. It was real. It was not like some regurgitated this, that, or the other. It was just beautifully shared. Clearly a reflection of a life lived in pursuit of what this means on a very real, life-giving level. All right, my friends, if these conversations are helpful, one, write a review, please. Please, it helps spread the word that fatherhood matters. It's going to take you like 3 minutes. Just write a review. If you're on Apple, if you're on Spotify, if you're on YouTube, wherever, write a review. Shoot a text to a friend. Hey, I occasionally listen to these podcasts. I think you would too. You're a great dad. And shoot, don't we all need some support? Just shoot a text, share the link. And then, hey, if you got a question, got an idea, got a podcast guest, shoot me an email, ned@rebelandcreate.com. Thank you to all you dads out there listening to Fatherhood Field Notes podcast. What you do matters. Don't be like everybody else. Be yourself. That's who your kids, spouse, and community needs. This is your guide, Ned Shout. Together, let's rebel against the view that fatherhood has little impact, and let's create lives engaged in mastering the craft of fatherhood. I look forward to hanging out with you next time.